This whole gender pay gap, we go on and on about it, don't we? Let's cut to the chase. Should women have the legal right to know what their colleagues are paid? This is all a survey, perhaps. Females in the Red Wall constituency, 71% of them, apparently. These females said that they'd be more likely to vote for a party that introduced such a legally enforceable policy. Asa.
It's a really interesting survey. I can really understand why 7 out of 10 female voters would have said, yes, they want to know what their male colleagues are paid, because that'd be really empowering. It would be really interesting to know, that transparency would win out and they would be able to go back into the rooms of their bosses, the negotiating hands strengthened, and, have really negotiate harder for what they deserve. However, it's interesting. I'm not sure we're ready for this sort of Scandinavian-style society in which everyone knows how much everyone else earns, sort of thing. It's almost like you're opening a Pandora's box there of, with certain issues that would be entailed in that process. But then to say something constructive on this, if I may, because I'm wary of sounding like I'm sort of mansplaining on this issue. I'm aware that there are things you can do to help really, democratise things and level the playing field in the workplace. So, for example, it is shown in evidence that if you publish salary bands for jobs rather than have it as it's competitive and, to be negotiated, then you're really helping, you're breaking open the closed shop, the old boys club. So you can do stuff like that, for example. You can also include in your job ads, and it's proven in evidence, and it encourages women to apply if flexible working is involved with those sort of jobs. So there are other things you could do, but I'm not sure this is the one.
Emma?
I think everybody should. I wouldn't say just women should be entitled to know what men earn, but vice versa. I think sunshine is the best disinfectant. Understanding pay transparency. It might be better, or maybe if we were to phase this in by doing it through publishing bands, employing people at different band levels, that might be a way of introducing it in a way that doesn't cause a complete immediate chaos, because I think what would come out with that transparency would be quite shocking to many, many people.
What do you think to the gender pay gap?
I think it's appalling. I think there are two issues to it. Also, I would call it the sex pay gap, but that's because I'm not a big fan of gender. But
what's appalling about it? So to be clear, in the UK generally, there's a 14.9% so-called gender pay gap. What does that mean to you?
Well, it means that, in general, we tend to favour the kinds of work that women traditionally do, and they are paid lower. And then, equally, there are penalties that people face for having children. And that child bearing is singularly done by women, and childcare is still predominantly done by women. And so there are points in your career. So quite often younger women are actually paid to a certain equality, particularly when you're talking about more graduate level jobs. Less so when we're talking about the division between traditionally male working class jobs and traditionally female working class jobs. But actually, even at that graduate level, that falls away as women take time out of the workforce to have babies, and then are usually the ones who will do the lion's share of the childcare for those children. Now, I don't want to see a system whereby women are penalised for their natural biology and their biological role. And I don't want to see a system whereby men are not an integral part of raising their children. And I think there must be a way of making the system better and fairer to both parties.
See, I've got to say, I find all this gender pay stuff a bit ridiculous. So when I hear this statistic of, there's this 14% pay gap between men and women in this country, I understand that as a woman, I'm supposed to feel like you. I'm supposed to be, what did you say, despicable, appalling. I know that I'm supposed to feel like that because that is what I'm being told, that I'm suppressed just because I happen to have a vagina as opposed to a penis, although in these days, goodness only knows, even that's up for debate, but whatever. I don't feel like that. I don't think it is disgraceful. I think it's a stupid statistic that, if anything, at best, should only ever be used to start a conversation, not to reach a conclusion. It pays no attention to different roles, the amount of hours people work, what they're qualified in, what their background is. So I think that this it's a huge, blunt weapon that gets smashed around to try and make women feel like we are suppressed.
No,
and
I don't think
feel like we're suppressed at all.
I don't think that's the case at all, Michelle. I think if anything, it is the start of a conversation about how we change the workforce, the workplace, to make sure that women have equal opportunities to earn equally.
But we do have equal opportunities.
But we don't, because we don't have a situation in which you are not penalised for taking in time out for having children.
But if you're going to have time out to have a child, which is a personal choice, then of course your earnings are going to be impacted.
But we all, as a society, need women to have children.
Of course.
So why are we therefore making it less attractive for women to have children?
So if you and I both decide to have a child and we're both at the same point in our
together,
career,
Michelle, it's too
not
fast.
Together, but we'll throw Asa into the mix. She can get involved in here. Sorry, Asa. But I feel like I need to push back against this constant notion that as a woman I'm somehow, like restricted and suppressed. It's nonsense to me. I have a child. My earnings will perhaps be impacted because I can't work all the hours God sends because of my little boy, but nor do I want to. I'm happy to take a dent in my earnings to have this beautiful gift of a child, and I think.
But why should that gift that you are also giving society penalise you and not the partner that you father the father of the child?
What do you mean?
Well, you're presumably, if there's a pay gap between you and the father of your child, aren't you equal parents?
Well, first and foremost, I don't buy this ridiculous notion that there is a pay gap between me and my partner based purely on he earns this and I earn this.
But he's not had a career break, presumably.
But I don't buy this notion of this gender pay gap, this 14.9% pointing to a flaw in society. It's nonsense. You can't just take the earnings of Asa and apply the earnings of me and declare that there is an issue.
But that's not what it is. That's not how statistics works. This is a statistic taken across society and across the different levels of pay for the whole of society.
Which is why it's nonsensical. Because why do you take this instrument as a man?
Again, as I said at the beginning, part of the problem is that division of traditional labour. The kinds of jobs that we see paid lower are the kinds of jobs that traditionally have been occupied and still are by women.
You may.
So,
yes.
Yes, it's very much a blunt instrument, the gender pay gap. It's a conversation starter in many ways. But then if you drill down, businesses are obliged to publish their gender pay differentials, but then it only helps so much. So
certain businesses,
big businesses. Yeah. And so if you take, let's say, big airlines, often it will show a very stark gender pay gap, but equally that's more often than not the story of men are more likely to be pilots and women are more likely to be on cabin crew, and they are paid differently, but due to the sort of skills, the training that each job requires, and as a result, because of the domination in specific professions like that, it looks like there's a real imbalance. So, obviously, it's an example in a broad trend of why, actually, in a weird way, I suppose you're arguing for transparency publishing everyone's pay.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it should be just available to women. I think this is something that would be helpful to all of society to just be a bit more open about this sort of thing.
Cool. What are you at home? Would you want your pay being publicly available or available within your world of work? I wouldn't. I think what I earn is nobody's business apart from my business and the person who is paying me. If you think, or anyone thinks, I'm not paid enough and Asa's earning more than me, well, I need to pull on my big girl pants and learn to negotiate a little bit better to get myself a better deal. I don't need to start crying.
And one of the ways to negotiate is to know the terrain in which you are negotiating.
Or it is to simply have an innate sense of your value and what your worth is and have the kahunas to negotiate.
Well, I personally would never, ever equate wearing your gonads on the outside as bravery, but that's...
Well, that's a good point. We'll agree on that one. We shall agree on that one. Oh, I don't know, ladies and gents, if I can call you that these days at home. What do you think to it? I just think that there is this whole notion in society all the time that everyone thinks that they're suppressed and oppressed and whatever these words are. I do believe that you can have and do and be anything in your career if you make choice, and sometimes choices come with an element of compromise and sacrifice, and that is a healthy life. And if you're someone that sits there and says, oh, I'm so restricted because I've had kids, well, get your partner to pull their pants up a little bit and share the parenting then. How about that? How come everything seems to be...
Well, they should absolutely do that. There we agree.
Well, there you go. We got there in the end. A point of agreement. You tell me, how interested are you in whatever anyone else makes? Quite frankly, I couldn't care less what other people make. It's each to their own and everyone is responsible.